New Orleans, December 1850. By noon, his back was a sheet of blood. Sebastian hung from the whipping post in the middle of Royal Street, wrists chained high, bare feet slipping in mud-streaked red. His shirt lay in rags at his feet. Every breath was a rasp. Ladies hid their mouths behind handkerchiefs. Merchants leaned in doorways. Children craned their necks. 39, the overseer called, raising the whip, for touching what was never his. The whip sliced the air. Crack! Pain tore across Sebastian's shoulders. He locked his jaw, forcing back a cry. His vision blurred, and through that blur he saw her. A woman in black silk, pushing through the crowd. Vivienne Claire Montfort. Her hair, usually pinned in tight coils, had come loose. The hem of her morning gown was dark with gutter water. She wore no hat, no gloves. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the noise. Heads turned. A white widow shouting for a slave was madness. "Madame Montfort, step back," the overseer snapped. "This man defiled you. We're delivering justice." Vivienne did not move. She walked until she stood so close Sebastian could feel the tremor in her breath. "He did not defile me," she said. "I paid him to teach me music. I am the one who begged him to stay. If there is sin, it is mine." The street fell into a shocked murmur. Sebastian looked down at her, at the woman who had lived behind iron balconies and now stood ankle-deep in filth for him, and understood. Either this was the moment he died, or the moment their world burned. Before we sink deeper into this judgment of two souls chained by law and skin, I want to know who is walking these streets of New Orleans with me tonight. From which city, from which country are you hearing this story? Tell me in the comments below. The summer of 1850 pressed down on Louisiana like a fever that would not break. Heat rose from the cobblestones of the French Quarter in shimmering waves, carrying with it the smell of river mud, magnolia blossoms, and the sweat of thousands who labored without rest. Even the walls of the Montfort mansion, thick Spanish brick, painted a graceful ivory, seemed to pulse with the humidity. Inside that mansion lived Vivienne Claire Montfort, a widow at 25, whose life was wrapped in silk yet hollow as an abandoned shell. She moved like a whisper through her own home. Servants stepped back when she passed, as if she might shatter at a touch. Her late husband, Monsieur Lucien Montfort, had filled these rooms with imported French furniture, Venetian chandeliers, and the finest porcelain, but never laughter, never tenderness. He had been 30 years her senior, brusque, controlling, treating marriage as an extension of business and her body as another asset to secure the longevity of his estate. Now he was gone, taken by yellow fever that swept through the city like divine punishment. People said the widow Montfort should thank God for her freedom, but Vivienne understood freedom only as silence, the kind that followed a storm and carried its wreckage quietly. Her days were filled with duties, supervising the sugar plantation outside the city, reviewing ledgers, hosting insipid teas with the women of Royal Street. She performed every task with flawless grace, yet no one ever asked about the tremor in her hands when she played piano alone at night, or why the songs she chose were always in minor keys. Vivienne had been born into a Creole family of old prestige, raised on strict etiquette and Catholic guilt. She had been taught to smile, to speak softly, to keep her desires folded and locked away. She had never known a man's affection that was not demanded but freely given. She lived in a world built upon appearances, where gilt mirrors reflected elegance but never truth. Far from these gilded rooms, across the quarter, another life burned with a quieter, fiercer light. Sebastian was 27, tall and lithe, with shoulders shaped by labor and long nights spent carrying crates for Madame Delacroix's household. His skin was dark as polished mahogany, gleaming in the Louisiana sun, his eyes deep and still as bayou water. When he walked, he moved with the silent watchfulness of a man who learned early that one wrong step could cost him everything. but it was the way he held a violin, lightly, reverently, like a priest holding a chalice, that set him apart. He had been born to a slave mother and a French violinist who had secretly taught him scales, harmonies, and the delicate, aching language of strings. For a few years, Sebastian had lived inside that fragile dream. A father who whispered promises of freedom, a mother who hummed lullabies in French patois. But death came early to both, and death sold him, as it often did, from household to household until he became property of Madame Delacroix. She liked to boast of her musical slave, hiring him out to play at soirées, weddings, even funerals. To her, he was a curiosity, art trapped inside a man she could buy and display at will. To those who heard him play at Congo Square on Sundays, he was something different. The free people of color gathered around him, transfixed. Children danced, elders closed their eyes, and young women clasped hands to their chests. His music carried longing, pride, grief, and a defiant kind of hope that should have been impossible for someone owned. Music was the only thing that made him feel human. Sebastian spoke little. When he did, his words were measured, careful, but in his silence lay a dignity that no chain could tarnish. He had learned to hide his thoughts behind a quiet gaze, to swallow his anger, to bow when required, to endure humiliation with a calm mask. Only when he played did the mask crack, revealing a soul he had been forced to bury. And now, fate, or something far more dangerous, was about to pull these two wounded lives toward each other. The day Vivian first saw him, New Orleans was alive with Sunday rhythms. Congo Square pulsed with drums, dance, and voices, rising in African, French, and Spanish melodies. She had not meant to linger. A lady of her class was expected to visit the square only briefly, and always with distance. But that afternoon, as she walked beneath the shade of a broad oak, a sound pierced the heat and held her still. A violin. Pure, lyrical, heartbroken. She followed the music and found him, Sebastian, standing in the center of a loose circle of onlookers. His head was bowed, his eyes closed. The bow moved across the strings with a tenderness that made her chest tighten. He played as if confessing something forbidden to the world. Vivian had heard virtuosos from Paris, musicians her husband invited for entertainment, yet none had played with the raw emotion that poured from this enslaved man. It was wrong, she told herself, to stare. But she could not look away. He opened his eyes at the exact moment her gaze fixed on him. In that instant, the oppressive heat of New Orleans vanished. The noise of the crowd dissolved. There were only two souls, caught in a current neither understood. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with a kind of startled recognition. She felt her pulse stutter. Vivian turned away too quickly, embarrassed by a sensation she couldn't name. But the music followed her home, curling around her like a whisper she could not escape. The next night, she did something she had never done before. She disobeyed the expectations of her social world. She visited Madame Delacroix and asked to hire Sebastian as her violin instructor. That decision, the first act of defiance in her carefully controlled life, was the beginning of everything. For Sebastian, news of the arrangement arrived like a quiet storm. Slaves were often hired out, but never to teach a white woman, never to cross such rigid boundaries. He felt unease, curiosity, and a flicker of something he did not dare name. When he stood in the grand salon of the Montfort mansion for the first time, violin in hand, and saw the widow in her simple cream dress with her hair loosely pinned, their eyes met once more. In that unguarded moment, both felt a shift, subtle yet unshakable, beneath the foundations of their worlds. She bowed her head politely. "Welcome, Sebastian." He bowed in return. "Madame." Neither yet knew how this room, this instrument, this dangerous proximity would alter the course of their lives and risk everything they both had left. The third lesson should have been like the first two. polite, distant, governed by the rigid laws of New Orleans society. Vivian had been careful, always keeping space between them, always masking the tremor in her breath when Sebastian tuned the violin. And he, in turn, maintained the stillness of a man who knew one misstep could end his life. But the summer heat was relentless that day, thick as syrup and heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine. Even the walls sweated. By noon, the entire Montfort household moved like ghosts seeking shade. Inside the music room, the air was stagnant. No breeze passed through the tall windows, and yet Vivian insisted on practicing. "We will stop if it becomes too exhausting," Sebastian said softly, noticing how her stays pressed cruelly into her ribcage. "I can manage," Vivian answered, though her voice wavered. "I want to improve." He studied her from a respectful distance. Her hair clung damply to her temples. The silk of her dress shimmered with heat. She was unwell, but determined in a way he had never seen a white mistress be. "Very well," he said. "Let us begin again from the second measure." She lifted the violin, bow trembling slightly, but the strings squealed off-key, the bow skittering. She winced. "Stop," Sebastian said, stepping closer. "You're holding too much tension in your wrist." He hesitated only a breath before crossing the invisible boundary that separated their worlds. He reached forward, gently touching her right hand. She inhaled sharply. It was meant to be instructional. Nothing more. But the moment his fingers brushed her skin, the tension in the room shifted. Vivian's eyes rose to meet his, and for the first time neither looked away. "Your hand," he murmured, voice low, "is too tight. Music will not come to you through force." Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingertips. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I know." He adjusted her grip slowly, carefully. The silence between them felt charged, humming like a plucked string. He stepped behind her to guide her posture, something he had done before, but never with this trembling awareness between them. His breath brushed the nape of her neck. She felt it all the way down her spine. "Relax," he said, though it was his own body that had stiffened with danger. When she played again, the note rang truer. But as soon as it faded, the heat in the room surged, and Vivian swayed. Sebastian caught her by instinct, one arm around her waist, her hand gripping his shoulder, their bodies drawn impossibly close, closer than any law permitted. "Madame," he breathed, as if the word itself could undo the gravity pulling them together. "I'm sorry," she said, but she made no effort to pull away. "It's the heat. I feel faint." He guided her to a chaise by the window and knelt beside her, not at her feet as a slave, but at her side as a man would. He fetched cool water from a pitcher, dipped a linen cloth, and pressed it gently to her forehead. His touch was reverent, trembling. "You should rest," he said. She looked at him, truly looked, not as a mistress surveying a servant, but as a woman seeing a man, one with eyes full of quiet sorrow and strength. "Sebastian," she said softly, "may I ask you something?" He hesitated. "Yes, madame." What does freedom feel like? A question no white woman had ever asked him. A question no slave knew how to answer without bleeding. After a long silence, he said, "It feels like a song you can almost hear but can never touch. Like reaching for something just beyond your fingertips." Her eyes glistened. "And you?" he asked unexpectedly. "Have you ever felt free?" She parted her lips, then closed them again. Her gaze drifted toward the open window and the world beyond it. "No," she whispered. "Never." In that quiet afternoon, under sweltering heat and trembling air, a truth settled between them. They were two prisoners wearing different chains, and in recognizing that shared captivity, the first crack appeared in the wall that separated their worlds. The days that followed unfolded like a long, trembling breath. one neither Vivian nor Sebastian dared release. Nothing outrageous happened. No dramatic declarations, no open defiance, and yet something profound had shifted the moment he caught her in his arms. The air between them was no longer merely warm. It smoldered. Their lessons became a quiet battlefield, charged with glances that lingered a shade too long, silences that felt heavy with unspoken questions, breaths they pretended not to hear. But neither crossed the line. Not yet. Because in Louisiana, a white woman's desire could kill a black man quicker than a bullet. And Vivian, for all her loneliness, understood the danger in every step she took toward him, and yet she kept walking. The first sign of change came during a lesson 4 days later. Vivian struggled endlessly with a melancholy etude. Her bow dragged, her notes faltered. She frowned, clearly frustrated. "You're afraid," Sebastian said quietly. "Of playing the wrong notes?" "No, of being heard." Her breath caught. No one had ever said such a thing to her. No one had seen her. He stepped closer, but careful, always careful. When you play softly, it is not because you doubt your skill. It is because you fear someone will listen. Vivian lowered her eyes, fingers trembling on the violin string. "I was raised in a house where silence was obedience, where women were ornaments, heard only when spoken to." He nodded. "Then this room can be something different." She lifted her eyes. "How?" "Because, madame, Vivian, here you may make as much noise as you wish." He said her name like a prayer, soft but forbidden, and Vivian felt the world tilt. That evening, she walked the balcony of her mansion long after sunset, unable to still her racing thoughts. Below, the city pulsed, distant music drifting from taverns, laughter from the quarter, ships creaking along the river. Life moved freely out there. Inside her home, she felt like the only prisoner, except she wasn't. The next lesson, she found him tuning the violin in the faint morning light. "Would you play something for me?" she asked. "Something that's yours." He hesitated. "My music isn't meant for parlors or drawing rooms. It's the kind of music that gets a man whipped if he's heard playing it at the wrong time." "Then play it here," she urged, "where no one else can hear." Perhaps it was the gentleness in her voice, perhaps the exhaustion in his eyes, perhaps the way her hands clasped nervously, betraying how desperately she needed something genuine in her life. Sebastian raised the violin. The first note pierced the air like a confession. It was a mournful sound, haunting, trembling with a history of wounds both seen and unseen. The melody twisted and soared, telling stories his voice never could. A mother singing under the moonlight, a father teaching scales before dawn, iron shackles clinking in the dark, the dream of a life across the sea. Vivian's breath hitched as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Sebastian." He lowered the violin, startled by the emotion in her eyes. "I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," she whispered. "Please." He watched her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with quiet restraint. "No one cries when I play," he said. "Not like that. No one has listened the way I have." The honesty hung between them like bare wires, dangerous, crackling. Their closeness did not grow through bold gestures. It grew through moments small as dust motes floating in the heat. The way she brought an extra cup of tea to each lesson. The way he began to say her name more comfortably. The way her laugh, rare as a hummingbird, escaped whenever he told a story about his childhood mischief. They shared secrets the way two people share a candle in a storm, hands cupped around the flame, their faces drawn close. Vivian told him about her loveless marriage to Monsieur Montfort, a man who touched her only to prove ownership. Sebastian told her about Celeste, the girl he loved, who was sold before dawn and vanished into Mississippi's cotton fields. Vivian told him she envied the people in the quarter who could walk the streets without being watched. Sebastian told her he dreamed of Paris, though he had never seen it. Vivian told him she had never known tenderness. Sebastian told her he feared he had forgotten what tenderness felt like. In these exchanges, something fragile and precious formed between them, a connection deeper than desire, rooted in their shared hunger for a life beyond the cages built around them. But the most dangerous moment arrived quietly, on a night when a storm rolled over New Orleans. Rain hammered the mansion roof, wind howling across the shutters. With thunder rattling the windows, Vivian found herself pacing the hallway outside the music room, clutching a candle. Sebastian had been late. Too late. She feared the worst, an overseer's rage, a street brawl, some terrible punishment. When he finally entered through the servant's door, drenched and shivering, she nearly collapsed with relief. "You're soaked," she whispered, rushing to him. "Sit, you'll fall ill." He tried to smile. "Just the rain, madame." But his hands were trembling, lips blue with cold. Instinct, reckless, human, overpowered her. She pulled him toward the fire in the drawing room. "You need to warm up. Please, don't argue." He did not sit until she gently pressed on his shoulder. Vivian fetched blankets, wrung rainwater from his shirt sleeves, and forced a mug of hot tea between his chilled fingers. Sebastian watched her with wide, uncertain eyes. "No mistress has ever touched me without expectation," he said softly. She paused, blanket in her hands. "I expect nothing from you," she whispered, "except that you live." Lightning flashed, illuminating them in stark white light. The thunder shook the room. Vivian set the blanket down, but her fingers brushed his cheek. She meant to withdraw. She didn't. Neither did he. His breath hitched, warm against her wrist. For the first time, he leaned into her touch. A single second. A dangerous second. A second long enough for both to feel the ground shift beneath them. He whispered, "Vivian, please." "Please what?" "Please don't be kind to me. It makes it impossible to remember the rules." Her heart squeezed. "Then forget the rules. Just for a moment." He closed his eyes. "I cannot afford a moment." "Neither can I," she confessed. "But I'm so tired of living without one." She took his hand, slowly, deliberately. His fingers curled into hers, trembling. It was nothing more than a touch of hands, yet it felt like the breaking of chains. From that night on, their lessons changed. Not in any visible way, not in anything that could be pointed to as evidence, but in every glance, every breath, every inch of air that sparked when they passed too close. Vivian found excuses to linger near him, asking for help tuning the violin, asking him to demonstrate certain fingerings. Each time his hand brushed hers, her pulse quickened. Sebastian began arriving a few minutes early, under the pretense of warming up the violin, when in truth he simply wanted a moment alone with her before the household stirred. They never kissed, never embraced, never crossed the final line, but every day they came closer. Every whisper, every secret, every moment she laid her hand on the piano, just so he would place his hand atop hers, and every night she lay awake, touching her own wrist where his fingers had been. They were building a world that could not be named, could not exist, yet breathed between them like a living thing. A world made of stolen glances and shared sorrows. A world in which a white widow and a black slave found themselves standing at the edge of something forbidden, terrifying, and inevitable. Something that neither God nor society would forgive, but something they were slowly, helplessly falling into. By late August, the air in New Orleans had grown thick not only with heat, but with suspicion. On Royal Street, gossip traveled faster than the breeze, whispers carrying like smoke through parlors, markets, and shaded verandas. No one spoke Vivian's name aloud, but women lowered their fans when she passed, and men exchanged glances too sharp to be accidental. The first sign came from Marie, her loyal maid. "Madame," she said in a low voice one morning as she tightened the laces on Vivienne's corset, "the house staff of Madame Delacroix has been talking. They say Sebastian walks differently now when he returns from your lessons. Happier, lighter. They are beginning to wonder why." Vivienne stiffened. "And what do you think?" Marie hesitated. "I think that happiness is a dangerous thing for a slave, and more dangerous still for the white mistress who causes it." Vivienne felt the words settle on her chest like a stone. That week she tried to distance herself. She shortened the lessons. She refused tea. She avoided Sebastian's eyes whenever possible, but the effort tore at her like a physical wound. It also worried him, because he felt her retreat like a tightening noose. "Have I done something wrong?" he asked quietly during one lesson. "No, it's not you." "Then what?" "It's them," she whispered, voice cracking. "People are beginning to see what we have not yet said. That alone is enough to destroy you." He stood very still, bow trembling slightly in his hand. "Destroy me," he murmured. "Not you?" Her eyes glistened. "They can ruin me, but they can kill you." For the first time, true fear flickered across his features, not fear of pain or punishment, but of losing her. Vivienne took a step back, but it felt like tearing a limb from her body. "We must be careful. Please, Sebastian, be careful." He nodded, because he could do nothing else. But danger was already circling. 2 days later, Madame Delacroix summoned Vivienne under the guise of an afternoon tea. The older woman sat stiffly, her lace collar tight around her throat, her expression carved from disapproval. "My dear," she said with a cold smile, "I hear you have taken a great interest in music lately." Vivienne's heart clenched. "I enjoy learning. It is nothing unusual." "Nothing unusual," Delacroix repeated, sipping her tea. "For a young widow who spends 3 afternoons a week with a male slave." Vivienne froze. There it was, the accusation behind the pleasantry. Delacroix set her cup down with a delicate clink. "My staff tells me Sebastian has become distracted. He hums tunes, smiles to himself. He even refused a glass of brandy I offered him, claiming he must remain clear-minded for your lessons." Vivienne's pulse quickened. "That proves nothing." "It proves," Delacroix said, leaning closer, "that something is happening under my nose, and under yours." Vivienne swallowed. "What is it you think is happening?" "I think," Delacroix whispered, "that you are playing a game you do not understand the cost of, and when the price must be paid, you will walk away still breathing. He will not." Vivienne felt her throat close. "I assure you," she said softly, "I have done nothing improper." Delacroix studied her carefully. "Perhaps, but impropriety rarely begins with actions. It begins with looks, with tones, with silences. Slavery forbids many things, my dear, but it forbids nothing so fiercely as affection." Vivienne's voice was a whisper. "Sebastian will not suffer for me. I will make sure of it." Delacroix's eyes hardened. "Then I suggest you end this arrangement before I am forced to end it for you." Vivienne returned home, numb. But her numbness didn't last. That evening she discovered something worse. On her writing desk lay a letter from her late husband's cousin, Monsieur Henri Beaumont, the man appointed to oversee portions of the Montfort estate until she remarried or produced an heir. The letter was short but sharp. "It has come to my attention that you spend excessive time with a slave from the Delacroix household. As guardian of the Montfort name, I advise you to cease any behavior that could damage the family's reputation. There are rumors, Vivienne, dangerous ones." Her hands shook. Rumors were no longer whispers. They were warnings. The breaking point came 3 days later. Sebastian was carrying a crate through the quarter when a group of white dock hands blocked his path. One smirked. So, you're the Montfort widow's new pet. Sebastian stiffened. Another man leaned in. Think you can put your black hands on a lady? You filthy... The man shoved him. Sebastian stumbled but did not fall. He kept his eyes down, every instinct screaming to remain calm. But calm wasn't enough. One of them swung a fist, another kicked his knee, a third grabbed his shirt collar. You think you're better than the rest of your kind because she lets you in her parlor? Sebastian didn't fight back. He couldn't, because striking a white man, even in self-defense, meant death. His ribs took every blow. His silence enraged them further. Look at him, one spat. Too proud to scream. Sebastian folded to the ground only when a boot met his stomach. Pain exploded across his chest. He gasped for air, but he didn't scream. Not once. When Vivian saw him the next day, the bruises were blooming violet and black beneath his shirt collar. His lip was split, one cheekbone swollen. She covered her mouth in horror. Sebastian, who did this? He shook his head. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. It cannot matter to you, he said quietly. If you react, if you show that you care, they'll know. And the next time, they won't stop at bruises. Vivian felt tears pool in her eyes. It's already too late, she whispered. They suspect. They're circling. I can feel it. He bowed his head. I know. Outside, thunder rolled over the Mississippi. Though the sky was clear, a storm was coming, one neither of them could escape. Sebastian, she said, voice trembling, we are standing on a trap door, and I don't know how to keep it from opening. He looked up at her with eyes full of desperation and tenderness. Then we hold on to each other, even if we fall. Their world was unraveling, and the noose was tightening. It happened on a Sunday, a day that should have been filled with nothing more than the distant hum of church bells and the sweltering quiet of late summer heat. Instead, it became the day New Orleans bared its teeth. Sebastian arrived at the Montfort mansion for what should have been their final lesson. Vivian had planned to dismiss him gently, to protect him, to sever the one thing that made her feel alive. She waited in the music room, hands trembling, rehearsing the words she prayed she would not have to say. But Sebastian never reached the door. As he approached the gate, a group of men stepped into his path. Not strangers, faces he knew from the quarter. Dock hands, traders, a cousin of her late husband. And at their center, holding a coiled whip like a scepter, stood Mr. Beauregard, a man who had always despised the Delacroix household. Well, well, Beauregard drawled. The little violin slave, headed to the widow Montfort's parlor again to teach her music? His sneer deepened. Or something else? Sebastian didn't answer. Answering would do no good. Running would seal his fate. And fighting would get him hanged before sundown. Take him, Beauregard said. Hands seized him, hard, unyielding. Someone struck him across the back. Someone else tore the violin from his grasp, smashing it against the gate. The shattering wood sounded like a gunshot. Sebastian's breath punched out of him. My violin... Oh, don't worry, a man laughed. You won't need it where you're going. They dragged him down Royal Street toward the public whipping post. Inside the mansion, Vivian sensed something was wrong. The clock chimed. Minutes passed. No footsteps, no knock, no quiet voice greeting the butler. Then she heard the shouting, distant but growing, a crowd gathering. Vivian rushed to the balcony, and the world stopped. On the street below, Sebastian was dragged through the dust, hands bound, shirt torn. Men jeered, women pointed. Someone threw a stone. And overhead, like a vulture circling carrion, Beauregard strutted with a hatred that gleamed brighter than his polished boots. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Without thinking, she flew down the staircase, ignoring the startled shouts of servants. She pushed through the front door into the blinding heat and ran. Barefoot, hair unbound, heart cracking. By the time she reached Royal Street, the crowd had doubled. Sebastian was already chained to the post, his back bared. Beauregard spoke loudly so all could hear. This slave has been defiling a white woman, touching her, corrupting her with his filth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some were shocked. Many were eager. Violence, after all, was a spectacle. Vivian pushed forward, shoving past bodies, ignoring curses, ignoring hands pulling at her sleeves. She reached the front just as Beauregard raised the whip. 39 lashes, he declared. By law. Stop! Her scream carved through the street like a blade. Gasps erupted again, but this time sharper. She stepped into the open, breathless, wild-haired, wearing nothing but her thin morning gown. A sight scandalous enough to topple reputations, but she didn't care. Unchain him, her voice cracked. You will not touch him again. Beauregard's lip curled. Madame Montfort, he said with mocking politeness. Surely you don't wish to defend a slave who has violated your honor. He did not violate me, she said loudly, clearly, letting every word cut. I invited him into my home, into my music room. She swallowed. And I invited him into my heart. A roar erupted. Chaos, disbelief, horror. Beauregard stared at her, stunned. You admit it? Yes, she whispered. I love him. Screams, shouts. A woman fainted. A man spat. Someone yelled for a rope. Beauregard recovered from shock and motioned to the men beside him. Seize her! 2 men lunged, but Vivian darted to Sebastian, throwing herself between him and the whip. You'll have to kill me to touch him again, she shouted. Her body shielded his, her arms wrapped around him, her cheek pressed to his bloodied shoulder. Vivian, he whispered, broken. You shouldn't be here. I won't let them take you, she said fiercely. Not while I breathe. Beauregard's face twisted with fury. You have disgraced your race, your husband's name, your bloodline. A murmur rolled through the crowd, agreeing, condemning, damning. Then someone yelled the words that sealed their fate. Hang them both! The crowd surged like a living beast. Men pushed forward. Ropes appeared. A crate was dragged from a nearby shop. Sebastian felt his heart hammer in terror, not for himself, but for her. Vivian, he rasped, run. Please run. I will not leave you, she cried. Not now, not ever. The mob closed in. Hands reached. Rage swelled. Beauregard lifted the rope. Bring them to Jackson Square. We'll finish this publicly. But before the crowd could lunge, a voice tore through the street. Enough! Gunshots cracked into the air. People screamed, ducking as bullets shattered roof tiles. The crowd parted like water, revealing a group of armed men and women, free people of color from the quarter, led by Jean-Baptiste, a respected merchant known for his fierce moral conviction. Jean-Baptiste stepped forward, pistol raised. You will not harm them, he said. Not today. Not while we draw breath. Beauregard scoffed. You're outnumbered. Perhaps, Jean-Baptiste said, but we are armed, and we will fight. For a moment, no one moved. Tension wound the street tight as a violin string. Then, slowly, fearfully, the mob backed away. Not out of mercy, but because no one wanted to be the first to die in a street brawl that would stain New Orleans' reputation. Beauregard lowered the rope, seething. This isn't over, he hissed. We will come again, with law, with soldiers. They will hang. Try, Jean-Baptiste replied coolly, and see what happens. Within minutes, Sebastian was unchained. Vivian nearly collapsed as she helped him stand. Vivian, he whispered, voice shaking. Her hands cupped his face. I'm here, she breathed. I'm here. Jean-Baptiste grabbed her arm. You two must leave. Tonight, before dawn. He looked at Sebastian. They will hunt you. For her confession, they will never stop. Vivian lifted her chin. Then we run. Sebastian looked at her, truly looked, at this woman willing to burn her world for him. You will lose everything, he said. I lost everything the day I fell in love with you, she whispered. Now I choose what I keep. The decision was made. Not with words. Not with vows. But in the moment, their hands clasped and they fled into the night. Every law broken, every boundary shattered, every fate sealed. They left New Orleans under the cloak of darkness, slipping down a narrow alley behind the Montfort mansion toward the riverfront. Jean-Baptiste's men waited with a small skiff tied loosely to a piling. The Mississippi glimmered under moonlight, wide, black, carrying the scent of mud and danger. Vivian held Sebastian's arm as he limped, each step sending a ripple of pain through his battered ribs. She wanted to stop, to tend to him, to give him rest, but there was no time, no safety, not anymore. You have one chance, Jean-Baptiste whispered urgently. Once you push off, keep low. Stay silent. By dawn, they will know you're gone. And once they know... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They'll come after us, Sebastian said. They'll come after her first, Jean-Baptiste corrected softly. A white woman who loves a black man threatens their entire world. Vivian reached out, gripping Jean-Baptiste's hand. You risk everything for us. Why? The older man's gaze softened. Because love like yours is rare, and because I refuse to live in a world where a man can be murdered for giving his heart. Sebastian bowed his head in gratitude. I will not forget your kindness. And you must not fail, Jean-Baptiste said. If even one story like yours survives, then the cruelty of this land will someday crumble. They climbed into the skiff. The river moved like a beast beneath them. Vivian settled beside Sebastian, wrapping his trembling hands in hers. Marie, brave, loyal Marie, pushed them off with a final heave. Go, she whispered. Don't look back. I'll mislead anyone who comes. Marie? Vivienne's voice cracked, but her maid shook her head. Live, she said simply, for all of us who can't. The skiff drifted into the current. At first, the journey was quiet. Oars dipped in soft, rhythmic strokes. The city lights faded behind them, swallowed by night. Sebastian's head rested against Vivian's shoulder, his breath warm against her throat. But hope is fragile. An hour later, distant shouts echoed across the water. Torches bobbed along the riverbank, and then dogs, the unmistakable howl of trained slave catchers. They know, Sebastian murmured. Vivian tightened her grip on the oar. Then we row. They rowed until their shoulders burned, rowed until blisters broke open, rowed until their arms shook violently. But the river was merciful. A fog rolled in, thick, silver, hiding them from the shore. By dawn, they were miles beyond New Orleans, carried by the Mississippi's relentless pull. Mexico awaited them. Freedom awaited them. A life not promised, but possible. Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. You saved my life. Vivian shook her head. No, you taught me I had one. History did not record their names. Newspapers did not chronicle their escape. Statues were not built in their honor. But somewhere in Veracruz, two graves rest side by side, marked by the same carving. They chose love when the world forbade it. In choosing each other, they became free. The story is over, but the pain of that era still resonates. How are you feeling right now? Are you listening alone or with someone? Share your feelings and tell me where in the world you are right now.